Main eventers. It's what WWE needs and what every WWE superstar wants to or should want to be. Few can and will make it to that elite level and stay there, but there always seems to be a group of other talents who have the ability to get there, but for whatever reason, never quite manage it. It could be politics, injuries, bad timing, or worse, but some superstars with serious potential seem destined to remain in the mid-card, despite being millimeters away from snatching that brass ring. I'm Adam Pachisi from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 potential WWE main eventers who never quite got there. Join us! Number 10, Mr. Kennedy. When Ken Kennedy burst onto the SmackDown scene in 2005, it looked to some as though he might just be WWE's next big thing. Oozing charisma and confidence, Kennedy was a master on the microphone and not too shabby in the ring either, carrying himself like a big deal as he quickly worked his way up the card. Unfortunately, he would get injured shortly after, a recurring theme during his WWE career, though he regrouped and returned in a major feud with The Undertaker, which saw him proving that he could hang out with the Blue Brand's measuring stick. As if confirming that the guy was a surefire future WWE champion, WWE booked Kennedy to win the Money in the Bank ladder match at WrestleMania 23. Regrettably though, he would once again go down with an injury and lose the briefcase to Edge. In a cruel twist of fate, it transpired later that the injury was not as serious as first feared and that he could have held on to his guaranteed title shot after all. Kennedy showed glimpses of greatness in the 2 years that followed, but was constantly hampered by injuries and other bad luck before receiving his WWE release in 2009, by which point he was sadly just another guy on the card. Number 9, Rhino. Towards the end of ECW, one of its biggest stars was Rhino, who soon joined WWE once Paul Heyman's company went under and looked decent as either the backup for Edge and Christian, or when having wild brawls as hardcore champion. When the ECW and WCW invasion of WWE happened in the summer of 2001, the man-beast role grew and he found himself mixing it up in major matches and programs with top-tier talent like Chris Jericho, The Rock, and Kurt Angle. Things were going well, and it looked like Rhino, whose gore, gore, gore finisher had been put over so effectively, could potentially break through and join the main eventers club. Unfortunately, he went down with a major neck injury towards the end of the invasion and spent the next year plus on the shelf. When he returned, he was put back into a decent position in the tag team and United States title pictures on SmackDown, but was never really given a sustained push and found himself slipping down the card. A switch to Raw and partnership with Tajiri didn't do much to reignite his career, and it wasn't too shocking when he was released in the spring of 2005. Showing up in TNA later in the year, Rhino became NWA champion, and though he was a bigger fish in a smaller six-sided pond, proved that he could be counted on to headline. Number 8, Cody Rhodes. Good-looking, athletic, charismatic, young, able to work as a babyface or a heel, and the son of a beloved WWE Hall of Famer. Where did it all go wrong for Cody Rhodes? Cody debuted as a traditional white meat babyface rookie and worked his way up the ladder, going from legacy member to dashing to, well, a bunch of different gimmicks as he picked up tag team and intercontinental gold. A proper utility player, Rhodes was able to adapt and take what was given to him and make it work, whether he was portraying a tormented Phantom of the Opera style character or a fiery underdog beside his brother Goldust. In the era of Orton, Cena, Batista, Reigns, and others of that ilk, there never seemed to be much opportunity for Rhodes to progress to the next level, and WWE made their view of him and his potential known when they straddled him with the Go Nowhere Stardust gimmick. That was the signal for Cody to try his luck elsewhere, as he bet on himself and became a top star internationally without the WWE machine. Number 7, Test. Big Andrew Martin had 3 of WWE's main prerequisites when it comes to looking at a potential main event player. He was tall, he was built, and he had a cracking head of hair. Debuting during the Attitude Era, Test was green and a few levels below many of his more experienced colleagues, but he caught on with the audience, in large part thanks to his storyline romance with Stephanie McMahon. His lust for the billion-dollar princess led to a feud with Shane and an on-screen association with Vince, which eventually manifested into a short rivalry with Triple H. We all know who came out on top in that one though, don't we? After being put in his place by the Cerebral Assassin, Test was most notably in tag teams and had some singles runs with the European and IC belts, belts before WWE gave up and released him. WWE then brought him back and tried to make him a focal point of the newly relaunched ECW, but it didn't quite work and a wellness policy violation saw his time on the third brand cut short. In another timeline, Test would have big booted that glass ceiling into 1,000,000 pieces. Number 6, Billy Gunn. Just going back to that thing I said earlier about being tall, ripped, and having a solid head of hair, well, Billy Gunn had all of those things and something more, namely, a great arse. Yes, because while he was just fine as a member of the Smoking Guns or New Age Outlaws, Billy got the big push when he suddenly became obsessed with his and everyone else's backside. Emancipated from his DX buddies, Mr. Ass won the King of the Ring and entered into a high-profile feud with The Rock, resulting in a SummerSlam match that ended, not so well for Gunn. Realizing that it wasn't working, WWE put the Outlaws back together soon after, but they weren't done trying to make him into a single star. Coming back from an injury layoff, Billy was rechristened The One, won the Intercontinental title, and given new entrance music that sounded like the theme song of the worst sitcom you've never seen. It was excellent, seriously. None of that worked either though, and WWE tried one more time in 2003, where once again, injuries and apathy proved to be his undoing. Number 5, Rusev. When Rusev drove out in a tank at WrestleMania 31, ready to do battle with top guy John Cena, I was pretty sure we were looking at one of the big stars of the future, if not the next big star. The man just had it. Having impressed initially in NXT, the Bulgarian Brute similarly turned heads on the main roster, his partnership with future wife Lana being one of the most featured acts in the company. When he was booked strongly and allowed to dominate, Rusev looked great and had some cracking feuds and matches with the likes of Sheamus, AJ Styles, and Shinsuke Nakamura, who he later formed a formidable tag team with. The bloke also clearly worked very hard to improve his overall game during his time in WWE too, changing his appearance and noticeably getting better at promos and acting in segments. The whole saga with Lana, Lashley, and Liv was the end of him though, as he was cucked into oblivion and then released due to budget cuts. How you don't have the funds or ideas to keep a guy with that much potential around, I will never know, but he's doing just fine these days in AEW as Miro. Redemption for the Redeemer. Number 4, Carlito. Beating John Cena for the United States title in his debut televised match was a good indication that WWE saw big things in the future of Carlito. The second generation star had a grand first couple of years in WWE, injuries aside, as he routinely won titles and was typically put in meaningful storylines. After a while, however, WWE seemed to cool, no pun intended, on Carlito, amid reports that he was difficult to please backstage and considered lazy by some in positions of power. Carlito had the talent and ability, but it wasn't always clear whether or not he had the passion and the drive. The company sent him a very strong on-air message when they had Ric Flair cut a scathing promo on him, which led to them joining forces, though it didn't stop Carlito from openly complaining about his position on the card. By the end of his tenure, aka the shiny baggy pants phase, it was obvious that his heart just wasn't in it, and he was used in less and less prominent roles, eventually getting released after falling afoul of the wellness policy and refusing to attend rehab. Number 3, Chris Masters. Another mid-2000s stud that seemed to have the world at his feet was Carlito's partner-cum-enemy, Chris Masters. Like a modern-day Lex Luger, the Masterpiece certainly looked like someone who could main event a WrestleMania. He was aided by a thoughtful presentation and WWE's commitment to getting his Master Lock finisher over, which they did thanks to the simple yet effective Master Lock Challenge. Impressive displays against Shawn Michaels, John Cena, and others proved that he wasn't just a gorgeous muscle monster, but could actually work, though Masters never got to the next level despite having the body, youth, and push that I'm sure plenty of his peers would have killed for. Before long, he started to flounder, his momentum certainly not helped by repeated violations of the wellness policy, which ultimately ended up costing him his job. To his credit, Masters cleaned himself up, worked hard, and got rehired a couple of years later, but the new contract didn't result in any sort of plan to elevate him beyond the level that he was at previously. Anyone who watched him mainly wrestling on shows like Superstars will attest to his striking improvement in the ring, but it was all for naught as WWE unceremoniously released him once more. Number 2, Umaga. Eddie Fatu's first WWE stint ended in disappointment when he was released after several unsavory outside-the-ring incidents, his reputation for being reckless inside of it doing him no favors either. He rebuilt his career around the world, particularly in Japan, and was brought back a few years later, not as Jamal but Umaga, an old-school monster heel. The Samoan Bulldozer went on an incredible winning streak, getting victories over top stars like Flair, Michaels, and Cena, though he failed in his bid to win Cena's WWE title in an amazing last man standing match. Umaga was on such a roll that he was handpicked by Vince McMahon to be his representative in the Battle of the Billionaires. It would prove to be the peak of his WWE run though. Just a year later he was thrown into the WrestleMania card in a filler match with Batista, which neither man seemed very happy about. Umaga was a big deal for a few years, but never established himself as the top of the card for long, with injuries and wellness policy violations often getting in the way of his progress. When he was on though, he was seriously one of WWE's best ever big men. Number 1, Ryback. You know him these days as that nutter who sometimes says mental things on the internet, but once upon a time, Ryback looked like WWE's next genuine breakout star. The former Nexus man disappeared for a while and came back not as plain old Skip Sheffield, but as a Goldbergian destroyer who mowed down jobbers for breakfast. He kept it simple, looked impressive, and was booked strongly. And wouldn't you know it, he got over, finding himself in the WWE title mix 6 months after his re-debut. Going up against WWE champion CM Punk at Hell in a Cell 2012, Ryback really should have went over on the night, but ended up suffering his first loss instead. And why is that? Well, Ryback becoming WWE champion wasn't part of the plan, even if he did manage to become immensely popular organically and had held up his end of the bargain in segments and matches. The big guy was still in the mix near the top of the card after that, and a heel turn and program with new WWE champion John Cena seemed promising, but he never quite got there. And apparently he never will, as he is now officially retired.